Good morning. It's Liverpool Transfer Daily here on the Blood Red channel. I'm Guy Clarke. Alongside me, Liverpool.com's James Martin, as we look to cast an eye over the latest Reds rumours and see what the rivals are getting up to as well in the transfer window following the opening weekend of Premier League action. Get your comments and questions in the chat box. We will try to get to them through the course of the show, but you're doing well, and the first weekend of Premier League action is done. Not maybe the start Liverpool wanted, but what did you make of the action on the whole?
Yeah, I mean, it's very underwhelming start to the season. It's not the way you want to kick off the campaign, but yeah, the perspective needed as well. There's no need to overreact to one result. I think Klopp was clear in the assessment that everything was below par pretty much across the board. I know that certain publications decided to pick out the one thing he said about the pitch and claim that was the excuse this time around, but really he just said that yeah, everything was below par, and there's going to need to be a drastic improvement. But I think we'd all be fairly confident that there will be a drastic improvement. We've done pieces on the site looking back at City of course lost their opener last season. There's been a couple of prominent examples in the great Sir Alex Ferguson teams of the mid 2000s where they went on to not only win the league but win them with convincing points tallies. So yeah, it's not the end of the world. It's maybe dampened the enthusiasm for the new season when we were all getting so excited, but it's not a disaster, and I'm sure we'll see a much better Liverpool come the next fixture.
Yeah, definitely. Well, come and say morning to us in the chat box and get your questions in as well. I was going to say the comment that's coming straight away. We've got a couple of midfielders to talk about today. Obviously, Thiago going off injured. Has it heightened your kind of considerations and thoughts as to whether or not Liverpool do need a midfielder before the close of the window?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I'm broadly with Jurgen Klopp in the sense that you generally don't want to be addressing injury concerns with transfers, because then when the players come back from injury, you've just left yourself with far too many players for one position, and it makes squad management very difficult. But on the flip side of that, they are all awkward medium-term injuries. It's not a case of I'll give it a couple of weeks and everyone will be back. So yeah, when that happens and the window is open, there is a clear temptation to dip into the market. And I suppose what you have to ask yourself with any midfielder who's linked is could you make it make sense for the long term as well as the short term? And I think if Liverpool could find a player of that profile who's like, okay, he can ease the crisis now, but then looking ahead to the future, he could also play a role, then that's the sort of player who I think it would make sense to maybe return to the market for.
Yeah, no, let's talk through the players then we've got to chat about today. And we got a comment in here straight away from Marie saying, no way Guardiola is letting Bernardo Silva leave for Liverpool. Reports in Spain over the course of the weekend. Of course, Barcelona have been heavily linked with him throughout the course of the summer, saying that Liverpool are interested in looking to enter the race to sign Bernardo Silva. Would be a very difficult one to do, wouldn't it? And would he fit into what Liverpool do?
Yeah, I mean, someone wrote a piece for our site yesterday where he mentioned that it would probably be the one of the most controversial transfers in Premier League history. I don't think that's too far off, to be honest. I don't think that's particularly melodramatic. It's in the last few seasons there have been two very clear dominant forces in the Premier League, and that's Man City and Liverpool. Obviously, this summer we've seen City prepared to do business with some other traditional kind of big six clubs, if you like, but that's mostly because they probably don't view them as rivals to the same extent as they do with Liverpool. So yeah, whether Guardiola would sanction it, it remains to be seen. I think it's possible. I mean, the comments he's been saying has been, it's all about what the player wants. We're not going to keep players there who want to leave. But I think that was broadly in the context of the possibility of him pushing for Barcelona. I mean, it was mentioned last summer that he wanted to go there. The rumours are back this summer, so I think more likely is that Barcelona somehow find some more money from somewhere and push for it. But yeah, if Liverpool came in, maybe City would be open to it. And yeah, to come to your second part of the question, would he be a fit for Liverpool? I think he probably could be. He's not dissimilar to a kind of more mature version of players we brought in recent windows. You look at Fabio Carvalho this summer in the sense that he's a kind of half midfielder, half winger. He can do both roles. that's a useful asset for Klopp to have in terms of mixing things up in the squad. He's obviously had a strong learning curve under Guardiola, which is a great education for any footballer to have. Klopp brought in Thiago, of course, a couple of years back, who had a similar grounding in Guardiola football, and he's adapted to the Klopp way pretty seamlessly when he's fit, of course. So on the pitch, I think it's one that could be made to work, but I think the backlash from all sides would make it nigh on impossible.
Yeah, he's not even the most popular player these days amongst the Liverpool fan base. It would take some turnaround for him to get on side. Tolo said, unfortunately, City won't release Silva to Liverpool. I mean, the chat box is very much alive today in terms of what else we've got to discuss. Kumar's getting involved. Said Bernardo would fit any team, but Pep wouldn't be silly enough to sell him to Liverpool. The other player we're going to talk about is Marcelo Brozovic of Inter Milan. He's been a player who long term has been kind of linked with Liverpool through gossip columns and whatnot. Kumar also in touch saying Brozovic would be a stopgap timing. We don't need any other players in their 30s. What do you make of the links then to Marcelo Brozovic?
Yeah, it's an interesting one with the age. I think he's technically 29, but the point still stands. It probably doesn't fit Klopp's criteria in the sense that, like I alluded to earlier, he is keen on signings making sense for the long term. I suppose the flip side of that is a defensive midfielder being brought in now is maybe the mold of player that would maybe make the most sense for the long term, because even once all of the injured players return, you're still looking at something of a void in defensive midfield. Obviously, there's Firmino, but as soon as he's out injured or even has a dip in form, which to be honest, we have seen more often recently, then there's no one else to step into the breach. I mean, you saw Klopp wasn't happy with him against Fulham, and so Henderson had to move back. Milner came on. It's not ideal. So in that sense, Brozovic would make sense longer term than just the period of the injuries, because, like I say, even with everyone back, he still performs a role within the squad. But yeah, I do think the age is a problem, because you get 2 seasons down the line, then you're already talking about potential successors to him and looking at the market for solutions. The only way it might make sense is if Klopp and Linders are really, really keen on Bajcetic. He had a great preseason, but lots of players have had good preseasons and maybe not made that step up. So they'd have to be very confident that sort of in 2-3 years' time he'll be ready for that role. And if that's the case, then maybe someone like a Brozovic could come back into the equation.
Do Liverpool need a dynamic player in that role, though? Because Fabinho's not the most dynamic. He's a very good passer. He obviously gets dubbed the lighthouse, doesn't he, by Pep Linders. He isn't the most mobile player around the pitch. He really does anchor that midfield. And as you mentioned before, when you were talking about Bernardo Silva, it's kind of those other ones either side nowadays who are the ones who get around the pitch more often. And obviously, we saw with Steven Gerrard under Brendan Rodgers how he kind of slotted into that quarterback type role. And actually, if the player in that role could probably go into their mid-30s, even beyond as Jordan Henderson begins to age, maybe that'll be the role that he takes on. It'll be interesting to see what does happen. Russell's gone in touch, says, I don't want Brozovic, I want Ruben Neves. What would you make of that?
It would be an interesting one. I suppose in terms of the age worry, that is addressed with someone like a Neves. He's more of the typical FSG age profile, if you like. I feel like he's been in the Premier League for a long time, and I still don't fully know what kind of midfielder he is. I don't think he'd necessarily be coming in as the Fabinho cover. He's much more of he's more of an 8, but he has equally, he doesn't seem like he's a constant creative outlet. Maybe that's part of the team he's in with Wolves, not necessarily the most creative. Maybe there aren't too many runs to pick out, and maybe it's just systems. Maybe put him in the Liverpool team and we'd see his creative side come to the fore. I think he had better numbers for that sort of thing, I think, in the Championship. So maybe it just depends on the levels he's functioning at. But he's not a name that would necessarily spring out to me as an obvious signing for Liverpool. I think he would just sort of go into that group of 8s who can all rotate and play, and I think that's where Klopp is completely correct in saying we don't really need any extra numbers in that kind of mould. It would need to be a game-changing number 8, or else someone who can cover convincingly at number 6. So I'm not sure Neves ticks those boxes for me.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Christopher Campbell said Ismail Bennacer would be a good fit for Liverpool, or is that just Sky Sports paper talk making that one up? We have discussed that one. That rumour is still kind of circulating and going around. And Kumar says instead of a stopgap option like Brozovic, why can't we go for Mateus Nunes of Sporting Lisbon? We never really replaced Gini, and Nunes is looking like a very hard-working midfielder. And we did get a question earlier on today as I just try and scroll up the chat box. So many people getting in touch today. Fernando says we need Nunes and Leandro of Santos. Also heard we want to sign Leroy Sané. I mean, that's another rumour that came out over the course of the weekend. Do you see kind of how it is right now, James? Liverpool, I mean, Fernando there wants two players. I can't see that probably happening before the end of the month, but it is going to be really interesting now about a midfielder, isn't it? And we've seen so many different names thrown in today.
Yeah, it's definitely made the conversation a slightly less hypothetical one. I mean, if I had to put money on it now, I'd still say we probably don't sign anyone for all of this conversation we've been having. But I think it's become more of a real possibility. It was more kind of idle chat up to this point. It's in terms of the links might be genuine, but maybe for 6 months' time, a year's time. But yeah, I mean, speaking after the Fulham game, Klopp, he didn't shut the door on it. He said we had to think about how we react to these injuries. He reiterated that he doesn't want to panic buy, and obviously, I think we'd all agree that's sensible. But yeah, it's I'd be much less surprised to see a signing now than I would have been 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, no, we'll have to wait and see how it does all play out. Well, thanks to everyone who has got involved in the chat box this morning. Make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. We're here each weekday morning at 9:30 a.m. discussing the latest Liverpool transfer rumours, and it is really great when you guys do get involved in the chat. But from myself, Guy Clarke and James Martin, thanks for joining us this morning. It's bye for now.